Hello. So, shall I begin now? Good afternoon, friends. And it is Cultural Studies Part 2. And in this session, I will ponder over what is cultural studies. Yesterday, I have spoken on, for the last time, I have spoken on what is culture. The definition of culture we have discussed, what is included or compromised or what is studied in culture. Now, we will have to focus on what is cultural studies. Dear friends, for the first part, I have discussed what is literature, what is cultural studies, and when it is thought as a cultural studies, it is one of the topics. Whatever I have discussed yesterday, the definition from anthropology, that is again has its own limitations. But cultural studies, as it emerged in the 1950s and 60s in Britain. So what is studied in cultural studies? What mean by cultural studies? What is expected in cultural studies? So cultural studies is now called as an academic field. But at the same time, it crosses the related disciplines as well. So, cultural studies is interdisciplinary. Cultural studies is interdisciplinary. It is also multidisciplinary and post-disciplinary field of inquiry. While we study literature, the text is studied from various ways. It is studied from the author point of view. It is studied from the linguistic point of view, from the reader point of view, and contextual point of view. So various contexts are there. Here in cultural studies, it crosses through other disciplines as well. So, like linguistics, we study language. In linguistics, linguistics is a science of studying language. Language has its structure. Just like in physics, we study. We take an object, but what is the object of study in cultural studies? So, no any concrete object at all we study in cultural studies, but still it is there is no referent or object to be pointed at. Like linguistics, we study language. Language is an object of studying. So, cultural studies, it is thought to be emerged with the establishment of a Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies in 1960s. So in the decade of 1960s, at the Birmingham University, the center was established, and Richard Hogarth then uh, Stuart Hall, and during the 1960s, it is time for post-war, the post-Second World War period. Of course, socio-economic changes were there, cultural changes were there, and there was a great upheaval in society in Britain. And when the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies was established, it is, of course, earlier it was denied. So it is generally asked or generally thought that it is thought that cultural studies, when it is emerged in 1960s, and of course there is the milestone of the establishment of the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies in 1960s at Birmingham. Here, what is cultural studies? I have made it short form. So CS for cultural studies. So it blurs and blends boundaries between itself and other subjects. It blurs the boundaries. It takes the sources of inquiry from other fields of study, other just like for example, economics, politics, feminism, like this, sociology. So it blurs and blends the boundaries. So there is no any watertight compartment between cultural studies and sociology, for instance. So the sources for understanding culture, cultural changes, cultural politics, cultural economy, and so on. So there are no boundaries, or the boundaries are blurred or blended. And so cultural studies draws important concepts from Marxism, structuralism, post-structuralism, psychoanalysis, etc. And so on, we can say. So Marxism, the study of Marxism, of course, it is from the social point of view, and there is, of course, the contribution of the Marx, which the concepts introduced by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and others. And the Marxism was extended in the latter masses. So, what mean by ideology? The class consciousness, class struggle, historical materialism, then base and superstructure, and all this. And Marxism, the concepts of Marxism are also modified by later masses. So Marxism is one of the source. Structuralism. Generally, we say structuralism, which begins in the study of language from Ferdinand de Saussure and his book, The General Introduction to Linguistics. And of course, these were the lectures by Ferdinand de Saussure, which were collected by his students. The notes were collected and it brought in form of book. So language has a structure. Each and everything has a structure. The culture has itself a structure. Levi-Strauss has done some important work on structuralism. So the ideas from the structuralism are also borrowed or also criticized or justified, and so on. Post-structuralism. The structuralism was restricted, and just like Ferdinand de Saussure has introduced the term sign. Sign has two components, signifier and signified. But these two components, and it is not always restricted only these two. The post-structuralism, so Ferdinand de Saussure's ideas about language is arbitrary. There is no natural or inheritance or inherent relationship between the sound image and the object. Uh, he has contributed to diachronic and synchronic linguistics. So these terms, Lang and Perot, so such concepts he has introduced, but the structuralism was restricted, and that's what the post-structuralism, which allowed or brought pluralism in meaning, and that's what cultural studies is called post-disciplinary. So it is a postmodernist idea, some which are borrowed in cultural studies, post-colonialism, post-structuralism, like this. Post-structuralism is a continuation of structuralism. It extends the ideas of structuralism. It gives the broadness to structuralism. For instance, Roland Barthes, who gives the concept of denotation and connotation, or the lexical or literal meaning and associative meanings. So in post-structuralism, various meanings are there. So in cultural studies, meaning is important. How the meaning of a certain word, which is either it is dominated, it is one-sided, accepted, non-accepted, but it has various associations. In the same way, certain ideas from psychoanalysis are also taken. So, cultural studies draws important concepts from Marxism, structuralism, post-structuralism, and psychoanalysis, and so on. Here, we have to think of the broadness of cultural studies. Initially, you can feel that it is something difficult. It is a kind of confusing kind of ideas, or you may find it a complex one. Of course, cultural studies, there is a complexity at the initial level. That's what we should know what is cultural studies. So after another points, you will get certain ideas. So cultural studies, how the world is socially constructed. See, constructions are there. For example, Simone de Beauvoir, in her book, the famous book, The Second Sex, she argues that a woman is not born. She differentiates or makes a difference. She classifies sex is a biological, while woman is constructed. Certain qualities, certain works, certain notions are associated with gender, male and female. So she argued that women is constructed, women is made. So the formation of women is made. So it is constructed. The gender is construction. And in articulate with the themes of difference and identity. Again, cultural studies considers difference and identity. The politics of identity, identity politics, what we can say. So identity is based on difference. So it is also studied in cultural studies. So what is cultural studies? What is studied in cultural studies? What is the scope of cultural studies? The next point, that is cultural studies on exploration of culture. Of course, yesterday, in the earlier lecture, I have already discussed what is culture and the various aspects of culture. These various aspects which are included in the concept of culture. So we can say that there is a class culture, there is a youth culture, various kinds of cultures you can associate or give the names, popular culture, subculture, and so on. So the constitution of meanings. So how meanings are constituted, how meanings are constructed, who gives meaning. So in the modern era, the text, again, here is a question of what is text. I'll come to that one as well. So a text discourse is constructed with science, the science are organized in a systematic way. Again, when we say science, and there comes semiotics, but I'll come to this point little later on. But here's the point: cultural studies is an exploration of culture. It explores culture. It constitutes a constitution of meanings and representations generated by human signifying practices. So, what are the signifying practices? Is it only verbal language? No. All the signifying practices and their context. See, pragmatics and all these things are studied because of the meaning is in context. The power